Right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Melissa Davis. I'm one of the event managers with the Office of Equity. Just real quick, before we get started, we have two ASL interpreters today. We have Amanda and Andrea. If you requested services and need to reach out to them, you can message them directly in the chat. We also have Heather with CART Services. If you need to, you can click the live transcript CC icon at the bottom of the screen next to the reactions icon, and then click Show Subtitle. We'll be spotlighting the interpreters as well for you so they stay on all the screens. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy Walker and let him get us started. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you everybody for joining. As we let people in, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Walker. I use he, him pronouns, and I work at the Department of Commerce. Very recently, I was one of the equity analysts in the Office of Equity and Belonging, and recently moved over to a new position in our Central Contracts Office as a compliance specialist. Most of my work has been dedicated in doing analytics and looking at contract management in my government role, but I have a vast amount of experience doing community engagement, working with different groups to achieve different goals. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the Office of Equity, to the folks that are putting together this facilitation today, like Melissa, who have just been really supportive. So I just wanted to really give a shout out to the Office of Equity and also to many of you out there who maybe know me. This presentation is really a culmination of years of conversations and of thinking through a lot of really challenging things. And we can't do this work alone. We have to do it together. And I think that's ultimately what targeted universalism is all about. It's about belonging. It's about making sure that everybody belongs. So let's go ahead and just go over a few quick things. I might be using some terms that you're not familiar with, and I'll do my best to explain what those are. I'll also be using some terms that you might be really familiar with, but might be not in agreement with the way that you might be using them in your day-to-day role. So things like contracts, for example, those are going to be the broadest thing possible. And I also asked some questions when doing registration, so I'd love to share just a little bit about who's in the audience today. And if you hear yourself being mentioned, your job role or title, feel free to just raise your hand or give a thumbs up or a heart just to show that, you're out there. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. So let's get to know today's attendees. You all come from a broad range of backgrounds, work duties, experience, knowledge, and skills. And there are 89 different agencies, offices, committees, and boards that registered for this presentation today. So I'm really honored that you all would come to hear me talk to you all. There's also a wide range of job duties, responsibilities, and experiences, skills, and knowledge in this room. So please take a moment and write in the chat to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do at work. Also, a challenge. I really want to hear from everybody who answered none of the above. So if you were one of those folks who said, I'm not in management, I'm not an analyst or internal services and so on, definitely put in what you do because I'm really curious. Government works in a lot of ways. One of my first jobs, they said the best kind of government is when nobody even knows that you're doing it. It just happens. So feel free to do that. So I'm seeing Perla doing language access over at the Office of Equity. It's going really fast, so I'm trying to read them. But as you can see, we all do a lot of really important work, and it takes a lot of us to do this and make it all happen, right? So, oh, I see Shoko in there, Melissa, Heidi, Rick. I'm only catching names, but I would love if we have this. I would love to go back and just read it all to better understand where you're all coming from. Thank you so much for sharing that. And there's my mouse. Okay. So another question we asked was, which of the following would you like to learn more about? And most of you said that you wanted to learn what targeted universalism is and why to use it. And that's definitely something I'm going to cover today. There were also a fair number of you who said that you wanted to learn how to measure performance relative to the universal goal. That's something that I really spent a lot of my time in my prior role doing. And we'll get into a little bit of it, but not super deep. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to reach out to me afterwards. My email address is jeremy.walker@commerce.wa.gov. Um, so yeah, definitely. We're going to cover a lot of these topics, but we'll be focusing most on the what and the why. Another question I asked was, is there a challenge you're trying to address by attending this presentation? And I made this little word bubble earlier, and there were really three themes that I could identify throughout all of the different challenges that you're trying to address. 166 of you responded to this question, and there were some themes. So, one of those was that you wanted to learn more about targeted universalism and why you should use it, but you also stressed wanting practical application that is plain talked. And many of you also mentioned the very real resource constraints we're under from the budget freeze, myself included. So we're all in that boat, or we're all in that same storm, but we might be in different boats. Um, and then many of you also mentioned the love that you have for working for the state, and that despite these challenges, you want to commit to improving equity, diversity, and inclusion, since those are our state values. And you wanted to remove systemic barriers and also figure out how to work better with communities. So let's get into it, what targeted universalism is in the practical application in government. I wouldn't I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Department of Commerce. We do a lot of different things, as many of you know, and these are just some of the buckets of things that we work on. So we work on housing and homelessness, infrastructure and broadband, small business assistance, energy, planning and tech assistance, community service, crime victims and public safety, economic development, and that's just to name a few. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we partner with a lot of different agencies. In my short period of time here, we've worked with the Washington Department of Military, we've worked with ecology extensively, Department of Health on many things, DSHS, you name it, right? We've partnered with a lot of other agencies to get work done and to serve the public. So thank you for those partnerships. So the public servant challenge that I would say we generally all face is that we have to serve everyone. Everyone has different wants, needs, and access to personal and community resources, right? We're all situated differently. And so I'm going to share a video that's going to cover the what and the why of targeted universalism from the creator of targeted universalism, John A. Powell. So give me 1 second as I set that up on my screen. And I don't know if I actually have I'm going to stop sharing really quickly because I don't think I have Uh-oh, did I just lose my sharing ability? No, there it is. So I want to share and I want to turn on the sound. Share sound. Optimize for video. There we go. Apologies about that, folks. All right, we should all be seeing a targeted universalism video on YouTube.
What is the most effective and sustainable policy response to problems in our society? Universal approaches are widely used in order to package policies for broad appeal. Universal policies such as Social Security and minimum wage provide the same benefits or minimum protections to everyone, regardless of status or group membership. But by treating everyone the same, universal approaches can't root out group-based discrimination. It may actually deepen inequality between groups rather than reduce it. And by providing benefits or protections to everyone, resources that could be targeted to groups worse off instead flow to those who are better off. In contrast to universalism, targeted approaches are commonly used. Targeted policies provide benefits or protections based on group membership or status. SNAP, the food stamp program, conditions benefits on income level. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires public accessibility for disabled groups. And affirmative action focuses on historically disadvantaged groups. Targeted approaches are vulnerable to the critique that they unfairly favor constituent groups over the public good by directing resources to marginalized groups who are already subjected to unfair stereotypes. But universal and targeted approaches are false choices. There is a third way: targeted universalism. Targeted universalism means setting universal goals that can be achieved through targeted approaches. This approach targets the various needs of each group while reminding us that we are all part of the same social fabric. This can be accomplished by following 5 steps. First, set a universal goal. For example, 100% proficiency in 8th grade math. Second, measure how the overall population fares relative to the universal goal. In this example, we might discover that only 80% of 8th graders are proficient in 8th grade math. Third, measure the performance of population segments relative to the universal goal. So although 80% of all 8th graders are proficient, we might find that only 70% of Latinx students are proficient. Fourth, understand how structures and other factors support or impede groups' progress toward the universal goal. For our Latinx students, classroom instruction materials and lessons designed for English speakers may impede learning, including math proficiency. Finally, implement targeted strategies so that each and every group can achieve the universal goal based upon their needs and circumstances. This may take the form of ESL-specific math tutoring for our Latinx students, while another group may require a completely different strategy to achieve the same universal goal. Targeted universalism rejects a blanket universal, which may be indifferent to the reality that different groups are situated differently relative to the institutions and resources of society. By aspiring toward shared universal goals, Targeted Universalism empowers targeted strategies capable of achieving those goals while moving us beyond concerns over disparities alone and toward our highest aspirations for all.
All right. So there you heard it from our very own Johnny Powell, who is the creator of Targeted Universalism. And I'm going to spend the next period of time to really break that down into practical steps that I've applied in my roles in government to assist you in applying targeted universalism in a meaningful way. So, why use targeted universalism? It's more focused on equitable outcomes for all populations rather than only focusing on comparing group performance against one another. And I think that's really an important piece is you're trying to achieve a goal for everyone in the public sector. And by doing so, you want to make sure that everyone gets there. And that's not only reducing disparities. Reducing and eliminating disparities is incredibly important. But the ultimate goal, when legislators are passing legislation, or the governor is making an executive order, or the justice branch is making an order, right? A lot of times it's looking at like how do we achieve the overall goal. So that's a really important thing to remember. And I think for a lot of us who are in different roles, and I'm not able to go through all of them, right? Because we have many different roles in government. But here are just a few that I wanted to point out in terms of the benefits of using targeted universalism. So it improves strategic planning by identifying clear universal goals for managers. For analysts, it can provide a clear role and responsibility. There are specific steps in targeted universalism for analysts to do. One of those is to measure the overall population and to measure the different population groups. So those are very specific tasks for analysts to do. And then for staff, right, another one, and I use staff very broadly in this term. So you may be in internal services, or you might be a program administrator. It really provides consistent reporting to monitor progress toward the universal goal. That's something that we here in Washington, we are a performance goal oriented uh, government. And so we want to make sure that we're performing at the highest levels possible and serving everyone in Washington. And targeted universalism can help you achieve that. So we're going to talk a little bit about targeted universalism and about outcomes. And I think one question that comes up, and I saw it in the registration, was is targeted universalism kind of running away from diversity, equity, and inclusion, or is it running towards it? And I would argue that it's running towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. There is one key difference, as I've mentioned before, which is it's really about achieving the goal for everyone. And that means that we have to remove the disparities. But oftentimes, when we only focus on those disparities, that's when we find ourselves struggling at a lot of in a lot of spaces. And those are important conversations to have. We certainly shouldn't be running away from the fact that, whether it's with accessibility, or it's about race, or it's about sexism, or it's about gender, right? All of those are incredibly important issues that we need to address because it impacts people. It impacts our fellow coworkers, our friends, our neighbors. And we also should be gearing towards the goal. And by ensuring that everyone achieves that goal, then we're removing those disparities as well. I can't do it quite as well as Johnny Powell can, though. So we're going to listen to another quick little video clip of him speaking. So give me 1 second as I line that one up.
What happened in terms of the application of equity, people started focusing on disparities. So in practice, equity became closing disparities between groups. And so the benchmark in terms of the goal was to get whatever the favored group has, or to close the gap between the less favored and more favored group. That does a couple of things. First of all, put groups in competition. And because oftentimes the assumption is in order to get there, we have to take from the more favored group and give to the less favored group. In racial terms, that means oftentimes taking from whites or white men and giving to women and people of color. And it's not surprising, the favored group, or whoever is designated the favored group, oftentimes object. And part of the objection is they're still holding on to the first concept of equality. But secondly, oftentimes they're not doing all that well themselves. Take, for example, the suicide rate. By some recent data, the suicide rate among white men is higher than African Americans. And there's still a gap. But the gap is we need to have more black men killing themselves in order to close that gap. Of course, no one wants that, right? That's not what we want. The goal is not just to get what white men have or white people have. And in some cases, they may not even be the favorite group. The goal is to do what? The goal is to end suicide. So the goal should be designated without it being necessarily attached to what any particular group has. And that takes us to targeted universalism. So targeted universalism says the goal is universal. It's something we all want, what Gary just laid out beautifully. And the strategy to get us there has to be targeted because we're situated differently. So we're not all in the same situation. We're all trying to get to the universal goal. So that's the difference between targeted universalism and equity. Targeted universalism is equity 2.0. It's basically saying we're trying to get everybody what they need to thrive and prosper in our country. And yes, whites may be closer to that, and they may be closer to that for a number of reasons, including the history of slavery and Jim Crow. But oftentimes they're not there. And then when you disaggregate whites, you see whites are distributed. So think about this. Let's say we're in a room, Gary and I are in a room, and a white person and Bill Gates is in the room, or Elon Musk. The disparity in terms of wealth in that room racially is huge. But I dare say, if Bill Gates left, that disparity shrinks substantially.
Hey, so really what we're talking about are some key differences between what targeted universalism is doing and what a disparity analysis does. And I would argue that they're both incredibly important tools, especially when we're looking for treatment of people. We always want to ensure that we're not treating people uh, in a way that's going to do harm. And we want to make sure that everyone can access our services, everyone can access funding, all of those things. So certainly disparity studies have a place in government to do work, and it's more important than ever. That said, targeting universalism, it still shows disparities, and it can create a universal goal for everyone to work towards. It identifies what each group of people needs in order to achieve the universal goal, and it identifies targeted strategies, which many of you already do. A lot of the provisos, a lot of the legislation, all of the programs that you're putting together, all of those are targeted strategies in many ways to serve different groups of people. And so we'll get into that a little bit later. But I really wanted to make sure that everyone understood that these things are not in competition with one another. They're really complementary of one another. And they both play a significant role in making sure that we have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive state, and that everyone belongs. So you've probably heard about a lot of different frameworks, and every single framework that you've been to or heard about has been like, this is the framework that's going to solve every single one of your problems. I've certainly been an attendee at many conferences and at meetings just like this one where I've been promised the same. And I'm here to tell you that targeted universalism isn't your apply all framework. However, it definitely has its place in government that's going to be really helpful. And I'm not going to go through this table. It's really meant as a slide that we will be sharing with all of you. You'll get the entire PowerPoint slide deck at the end. But really, it has some key characteristics and benefits, but it also has its challenges too. And one of those challenges I would say is it really requires institutions to break down silos, let go of egos, and co-create with many communities. And I would be wrong if I didn't state that that happens in government too, because we're human, right? We all have egos. There are silos, and doing coordination is hard. So those would be many of the challenges that the targeted universalism framework faces. So why use targeted universalism? Well, it really focuses on that universal goal, which allows you to create that coalition of folks that are trying to solve for a problem. It also measures both the general population and the population segments. And I would say that most good analysts already do this. They just might not do it in a targeted universalism approach. And then another really important piece is it empowers communities and population segments to come up with their own solutions instead of prescribing and controlling exactly how they will achieve the universal goal. This is something that I've heard many from the Office of Equity state time and time again. It's one of the reasons why we have community compensation. So thank you, Office of Equity, for really helping and facilitate that process for the agencies. And I would also say that over time, it can even lead to co-governance models that we've seen work really well in government. So when do we use targeted universalism? And this may be different at your agency because you have different requirements, you have different compliance needs. This is something that I have worked out at the Department of Commerce with our internal services. So I'll just show you an example of what this looks like. So generally speaking, we'll get an authorization or action. That could be a proviso or legislation, some sort of funding. And the first thing we need to know is if it's an environmental justice assessment. Does it need that? Because Commerce is obligated under the HEAL Act to review and do that. We have a whole team that does that at Commerce. So shout out to our HEAL team if you're on the call. And if it is, right, then they would follow the HEAL team guidance, right, and probably not do targeted universalism. Environmental justice and targeted universalism are very complementary. They are not opposed at all. So if it's not, right, is it clear in a simple action, right? Sometimes you'll get a proviso and it's like, we need this exact thing, and there's only one organization in the entire state that does it. That's going to be pretty clear cut in what to do. So you would do that, right? You don't have to go through any more kind of complicated process to figure that out. Oftentimes, we'll also get some fairly vague guidance, and this is when you can apply targeted universalism to help you clarify what it is that needs to be done and how to get it done. So I'm going to go through a fairly general example. You're going to meet some different characters. These are not real people, but I put them in there because I really think in this day and age, the world kind of forgets that people exist in government too, that we're the ones that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting and work. So if you see yourself in one of these, give yourself a like or a heart because you're doing all this hard work. So let's meet Nicole. She is a managing director of the entire unit at her agency. She recently had her unit go through a difficult budget cut process, which ultimately meant doing more with less. Fortunately, Nicole has been learning a lot about targeted universalism and has been applying it in her team and the communities she works to serve under the direction of her unit. Like Nicole, you probably have many different goals, objectives, deliverables, and tasks to do, but which ones are universal goals? Universal goals are about the what, not the how. Universal goals are often simple without instruction on how to get there. They also don't always have to be achieving 100% of something. One useful place to start when thinking about goals is to think about the 15 impact areas from the Office of Equity. So here they are on the screen. Which ones stand out to you? Take a moment to identify an impact area and write out a universal goal. Don't worry if it's not perfect. Write your universal goal in the chat when you're done. We'll take a few minutes to practice that. So I'm reading, Jen wrote, provide water for those in need. Everyone have access to bus within 1 mile of their house. That's from Stephen. Amanda wrote housing and home ownership. Angie wrote all people have enough food and proper nutrition. Rosie wrote I can use the goal on the slide house everyone in a stable setting that meets their needs. Let's see here. Samantha wrote, it's hard to pick one. Yeah, it can be. Sometimes you're working on multiple, right? It's a good point. Heather wrote, everyone can access healthcare. Pamela wrote, provide nutrition for individuals and families. Um, let's see here. Teanjali wrote, reliable, affordable, and safe transportation options and systems for all Washingtonians. Jenna wrote, equal access to the civil legal system. Um, Nagmana wrote, Washington for all, help all Washingtonians to thrive and help them meet their needs in every impact area identified in the universal goal. That I think I'm gonna stop there for reading. But yeah, right? Like these are very aspirational. It doesn't get into the how. It's really about what is it that we're trying to do for everyone within the group that we're trying to work with. Some of those could be really, really specific, while others could be extremely broad. And there are challenges with all of those. Some people have heard of SMART goals, and I'm a big fan of SMART goals. I've also heard of SMARTY goals. And you can use those approaches as well to design your goal. Sometimes you'll see a deadline, right? So it's like, by the year 2030, we will achieve X, Y, and Z. So there's lots of different ways to put together these goals, but ultimately you're trying to achieve something for a group of people that's fairly large. And this is helpful. Excuse me one second. This is helpful because you'll be able to build a better network, a better coalition, a better group of people who are working on the same goal. I've seen it in a lot of different government spaces where you might have 15 different partners from different agencies working on things. Like, for example, just off the top of my head, SEEP or another one is the Small Business Resource Network here at Commerce. They have these broad coalitions of people working together for a common goal. I keep losing my mouse, and that is what is keeping me from going to the next slide. All right. So, great job, everyone. While the next step isn't exactly a targeted universalism step, I wanted to call it out because it's really important as a public servant. Did you know that there are over approximately 100,000 state employees? I don't even know how many smart, talented, and skilled people who work in state contracts. I know at last count for commerce, we had approximately 8,000 contracts. That's a lot of people. And so that's why Nicole spends a lot of her time networking with different people who also work towards the universal goal. And so, as a manager, a managing director, making those connections, breaking down those silos is a really important task that is ongoing. So, take a moment and write down the people you rely on to help achieve the universal goal. And feel free to write them in the chat if you know that they're on here, maybe give them a shout out. They could be anyone. It could be someone in your internal services. It could be a fellow coworker. It could be your manager or supervisor or one of the people that you supervise. Am I? I'm not on mute, am I? Or maybe I'm just not seeing the chat populate. Thanks, Kyle. Also, I'm going to give a shout out right now to Kyle Gitchell, who's my former supervisor. And even before he was my supervisor, he was the one that turned me on to targeted universalism. I was a brand new analyst at Commerce going through some pretty challenging projects. And Kyle said, "Hey, have you checked out targeted universalism before?" I was a big skeptic. And ever since then, I've really embraced this framework as a way of doing work. All right, we see Attorney General's office. You know it was coming, Kyle. He wrote no. Let's see here. Amy wrote, I work with a large number of volunteers and they are helping move this work forward. Amanda wrote, Housing Authority. We have the Health Equity team from Missy. Aisha wrote, Foundation for Tacoma Students, improving high school graduation rates for all Tacoma. And then Alice wrote Customer Insights Committee, General General Attorney General's Office. Um, Davey, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Operations team, program review and support teams, LEAs, skill centers, right? Like the list can go on and on. Like we have a lot of capacity in many ways, but sometimes we forget out of maybe urgency or just trying to do the work ourselves that we can reach out to other folks to either borrow ideas or be a sounding board or really working on different things. And that can reduce the stress and the work that we all are facing every single day. So it's really important for all of us, not just managers, to be thinking about what the network is and who else is out there. So we're gonna keep going here, and the a really important part that I think gets missed in a lot of academic frameworks is what are we actually authorized to do? Compliance is always going to be an important aspect of government work. I now am a contracts and compliance specialist, so it's literally in my job, but it is in all of our jobs to remain compliant with all laws and regulations and also ensuring that we're spending the money on what the legislators authorize us to do. So, making sure that you have that clear understanding of the directive from executive leadership, the executive order, the job description, the law, the proviso, or other things. It's just a really important piece of making sure. So checking in with those people, making sure that you're not doing something that you're not supposed to be doing. Um, so fortunately for Nicole, in this next step, it's to assess the general population. And remember, I called this out specifically for analysts. And it's not to say that non-analysts can't do this work. They can. It's just that when you have an analyst who has years of experience of doing this work, having analysts can be really, really helpful. So, fortunately for Nicole, she has a pretty good idea of the universal goal and has a stronger understanding of who all is working on the universal goal. So, the next step in targeted universalism is to assess how the general population fares compared to the universal goal. For example, what percent of the general population are achieving this universal goal? And it's a really important step. I don't think I need to explain too much as to why, but Nicole really can't do the work on her own. So she needs someone like Christiania who can do this work and has the skill sets to do it. So raise your hand if you're a Castania, if you're an analyst. I would love to just or give it a like or heart or whatever. Would love to be able to see that. But yeah, there's a lot of us out there that do this type of work. And about Cristania, she's smart, skilled, experienced, management analyst, strong understanding of intersectional and asset-based thinking. But there's also challenges too, right? There's no budget to really conduct a robust study. And a lot of management analysts have other tasks that need to get done. So, how do you think Kristania can do this analysis in just a few weeks' time? So, go ahead and write down an answer as to how you might approach doing this work that Kristania has just been assigned. So, Jeremy Whitaker wrote, work with partners to find existing data sets. Elijah wrote, negotiate what work is prioritized. Nagmana wrote, create a network. Um, Samantha wrote, working with community partners who may have gathered similar data. Mm-hmm. Kathy Greenwood, shout out to Kathy Greenwood. If you want data ethics and equity, go to Kathy Greenwood. Amazing work there. But Kathy wrote, ask a librarian for help in finding existing data and research. Yes. Yes to that answer for sure. We also have Jennifer reach out to all the contacts you have in the field and use what they already have as well, right? And so we're really gathering a lot of existing information, and that's really all you can do when you're given a tight deadline and you're given no operating budget to do any kind of study. So that's pretty important. Let's see here. So, um, yeah, we rely on existing information. Some of us might conduct a literature review or a systematic review. For me personally, I like systematic reviews because they're more rigorous than a literature review. But sometimes, depending on the universal goal, the answer might already exist, right? It might be so obvious because it's like, it just came out in our report that we contracted for, right? So sometimes it's really obvious, sometimes it's not. But a few things that I want to go over are some of the steps of that systematic review, and it may differ depending on the approach. Not an epidemiologist. I don't have my PhD in statistics, so I always defer to those folks if they have a better approach. But here are just some general steps. So you want to frame questions for review. So an example could be, what percentage of the general population experience homelessness? And then number two could be, identify relevant work. So it might not make a lot of sense for us to use research that's in another country or another state. And instead, you might want to narrow your area of the research to just Washington State, or even narrower. And then you also might want to include things like age or income restrictions or demographic identifiers that are relevant for the group that you're working to serve. And as many of you pointed out, it's also really important to work with those in the community who experience this work, which lived experience is often the term used these days. And then step three, assess the quality of the studies. So we discuss relevance, but what about accuracy, right? Making sure that you have the right sample size. And you also want to summarize evidence and calculate the population average. So all of these steps, right, they're very specific to what an analyst would do. And I also have notes in my slide deck that you can go back and read over that go into a little bit more detail. But for time, I'm going to keep going. So this next one is that Kristania conducted a systematic review of available data and community research and found that 75% of the general population is able to achieve the universal goal. So now that we have a baseline understanding of where we are at, the conversation is then, okay, well, then where do we want to get to? And everyone agreed to a universal goal of 95%, right? Again, you don't always have to be at that 100%. So, it's just a conversation with the people that you're working with. And I would always, always, always say, center the community that is most impacted, center those communities that are being impacted. If they're not at the table, they should be, because without them, you're not going to be able to achieve that universal goal. So, Now that you've gone ahead and assessed the general population, you're going to be looking at those segment groups. So that could be by demographic, geography, income. There's lots of different ways to splice and dice data sets, right? But the good news is that because you've already conducted that systematic review or that literature review, you've looked at existing data, you probably have a pretty good idea of who those groups are. And that's really what this is. Is there anybody from RDA on the call from DSHS today? I know there's like 150 of you all out there who are really good with stats, really good with resourcing and data, and also any of the other epidemiologists that are out there on the call. If you have these people, I strongly encourage you check in with them and you say, hey, do we have this right? Like, are there particular groups that are significantly different, significantly situated in a different way that we need to be tracking? And again, this is all based off of what you're authorized to do. So, just making sure that you're connecting with those people that already exist in government and checking with them to be like, do we have our groups right? Another thing that I'll say is this, by having this work figured out, if you're able to work with a work group from the community, then you're going to be more accurate. Don't do this alone. I think that's the biggest mistake that we see consistently is you'll have one person picking out the groups and then that becomes problematic. So Christiania was able to identify several population segments that are situated differently, and based on the systematic review of existing data and research, um, they were able to find that groups were situated differently, right? That's the reality of our world due to systemic harms and historical harms. So, what are your observations about this visualization? Take a minute and enter an observation in the chat. What are your big takeaways from this chart that you're seeing right now? And I also just appreciate everybody sharing um, studies and reports. So Jennifer wrote, Group One needs a different strategy. Um, Maureen wrote, some are closer to the goal than others. Danielle wrote, every segment is below the universal goal and will require a unique intervention to reach the goal. Yep. So all of those are correct, right? And it's really about, I think, one of the things that I hear a lot when working in government is data is the end solution, and that's not true. Data is the conversation starter, right? This is when we lean into curiosity and can really take a look at the data and say and not necessarily rigorously question it because it's probably been reviewed and validated, but just ask like, why is this? What needs to be done differently in order for us to achieve the universal goal? As mentioned by Jennifer, maybe the first group needs a different strategy, or maybe another possibility is that the strategies already exist, but group one just isn't getting the access needed in order to achieve the universal goal, right? We don't know why. And so that's really like the next step is figuring out and understanding uh, the structures and barriers. This was another really important piece that a lot of people registered for to figure out. And so, ways to understand barriers and supports. There's a lot of different possibilities. But I want to give a shout out to all of our community outreach and engagement folks, maybe you work in communications. So, yeah, just give a heart, give a love, to all those folks for being in communities, listening, having those coffee meetings, going to community events, listening to community leaders, whether they're elected or not elected, right? That's important work. And I want to just share that folks like here in Herlinda are able to really have a strong understanding of what's going on in those communities. So, Herlinda, right? Maybe you're one of these folks and you're smart, skilled, and experienced. You know about community outreach and engagement. You have strong understanding of intersectionality and asset-based thinking. Probably multilingual, right? Spanish is spoken in every single one of our counties, and it's a large number of folks. We also have large populations that speak Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, Chinese. Tagalog, right? Like there's a lot of different folks that live in our communities that speak these languages, and they're multilingual themselves. They may speak English perfectly fluent. And thank you, Nagmana, Dari, Farsi, Arabic, and the list goes on, right? At last look, when I looked at the DES contracts, they had contracts with uh, consultants that can do translation in over 160 languages. So shout out to DES for putting that together. I know they're working on an update and it's not easy to do. So thank you, DES, for doing that important state contract work. So, understanding the structures and barriers, you might find different categories than these, but these are the ones that I typically find when doing a lot of this work. So, for supports, it's usually self, family, community, nonprofits, local governments, tribes, agency or program, and other agencies. And then for barriers, it's usually going to be historical and systemic discrimination of some kind, related indirect challenges, lack of outreach, lack of trust, lack of resources, people just not knowing that these supports really exist, and then also inefficient processes, right? We are constantly working to improve our processes. Shout out to Results Washington for providing a lean community of practice. That's a great resource for you if you're looking to improve and remove barriers internally. All right, so we finally made it to the targeted strategies, and Erlinda worked with the team and facilitated some great community engagements. So to and after talking, right, Nicole says, who's the manager, she's like, this is a long list of targeted strategies. We can't possibly do all of this work. And so what really is important is being able to work with a committee or a group of diverse people who can take a look at the different targeted strategies and what you're authorized to do. And right, like there's a big group of people out there that you might be able to tap into that can help you figure out what's important. And the thing that I want to point here is the kind of triaging of what you're able to do as part of your program versus, say, as part of the network, you can probably implement all of the targeted strategies, right? So instead of trying to build a program that can serve every single targeted strategy, think about what is it authorized to do, and then how can the network, how can the coalition, how can the bigger group of people that you've been working with handle these different targeted strategies. That reduces your need to have a larger budget. It improves your capacity and allows you to do the quality work that you need to do. So, taking a look at the cost, the scope, the timing, and the authorization, those are all really important pieces. I'm almost done here. So, with targeted strategies, right? You want to take a look at where those might need to occur. And as was mentioned previously, group one might need more resources. However, you might not be authorized to provide that exact resource. Maybe that's something that someone else in the network that is working towards this common universal goal can provide. and your program is unable to. So maybe you need to focus on a different group, or maybe you work on providing a service that's going to incrementally help everyone, right? It's just going to be a case by case basis depending on what you're authorized to do from the legislature or the executive office. So let's talk about targeted strategies and really getting into implementation. So, how many of you are contract managers? Give a like or a heart. We probably have a lot of them. As I mentioned before, at Commerce, we manage just around 8,000 contracts, which is a lot. And we have a lot of contract managers here at Commerce. And so one of the targeted strategies is, identifying the time to implement. And there are usually two different ways that the state government can do this. So you can either do direct services. So shout out to like DSHS. I know you do a lot of direct services. We also do some contracting too. And Klein here is a contract manager. So he's the one responsible for writing requests for proposals, for targeted strategies. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. Carrie is the contract specialist at the agency and really ensuring that we're complying with the law. Is the proviso being followed, right? We're not appropriating dollars for something that it's not appropriated for. So that's a really important piece. I want to give a shout out to OMWBE. Even though it's mainly for procurement, which I'm not going to get too much into, these steps in forecasting, taking a look at statewide contracts, internal processes, outreach, subcontractors, and really unbundling work is an incredible resource for anyone to be using, regardless of whether you're doing pass through or procurement, right? The rules are going to be different, and I'm not going to get into that too much. But this is a great resource for you to take a look at how do you unbundle services so that it's more competitive, and you're making sure that we have a diverse set of providers in achieving the universal goal. So another part of this in the work, in the contracts, in the making of this work is you want to be taking a look at how are we measuring that progress. And I want to give a shout out to OFM Results Washington and the Office of Equity for coming together and creating the performance measure guide for Washington state agencies. It's a great resource on how to go about building those performance metrics. And you can just embed that right here into implementing your targeted strategies in your contracts or in your direct services. Another aspect, of course, is ensuring that you have good data sharing practices. This is a really important part, especially in today's world. And, we have folks in IT, chief data officers. And so if you're one of those folks that works with data to make sure that it's secure and that it's private, just give yourself a little bit of love. If you know somebody there that does that work, it's really important. And WATEC has these privacy principles that are really good. I'm not going to have time to go into all of them, but it's about security, data minimization, lawful, fair, and responsible use, and so on. So definitely check out all of those. And I know I'm running short on time, so I'm just going to kind of finish up here with, really creating a relevant and diverse team to review and selecting applicants. So by this point, right, you've gone ahead, you've written out your scope of work, you have your contract, and now you're in selection process. So making sure that you have that diverse group. We've heard a lot of that before. And then another piece is making sure that you negotiate the contract, right? A lot of contract managers think that you shouldn't negotiate, but really you should be. And by having a negotiating process with this, you're going to be able to really identify what needs to be done. Sometimes you'll be able to identify or estimate how much will be improved in the universal goal through a specific targeted strategy, but not always. And I think that that's really hard to do without a significant budget investment in like a post review, especially with someone who has maybe a PhD in statistics. But that said, you can still tell a story of this is how many people we serve. These are the services that got delivered. So I know that the legislators are very keen on us being able to show the progress. And we might not always be able to do that quantitatively, but we can certainly tell the stories, which I know a lot of us are successful at. So I really hope that, and I know I had to kind of rush here in the last few seconds, but the big takeaway that I have on this presentation is that while there's a process, it's a network of people just waiting for you to connect with them. I hope that through the hearts and the claps and the likes that you saw here today, you reach out to people, you network with them, and you rely on each other in order to build up your capacity because we're in a budget crisis right now that really doesn't allow us to spend any more than we've been given. So we really do need to lean on each other in hard times in order to achieve a universal goal. And I think that's all the time I have. I was hoping to have some time for questions. I can stay a little bit late if people do have questions, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was such great information, and I appreciate everybody for joining. You can email me. I'll put it in the chat. melissa.davis@equity.wa.gov if you have any questions, and I'll be sending out a survey. The presentation and the recording will be available soon. So thanks, everybody.